Hi, class. I'm excited to share with you chapters 11 and 13. Remember, we're skipping 12 so that you can hear more about Sandra's journey and look forward to talking on Wednesday about some things that you learn. So here we go.
I woke up in the home of a relative near the capital of Burundi. I don't remember how I got there. I was like a zombie. There were 6 kids in that family. We called their dad Mutware, our uncle. His mom and my father's mom are related. In our culture, they would be considered brothers. Some of my cousins there were around my age, and I could tell they didn't know how to wrap their heads around what had happened to us. They had no idea how to play with me or how to cheer me up. The house was tiny, and my traumatized family had suddenly piled in there with nowhere else to go. Everyone seemed confused. Heritage, Alex, and my mom had all checked into a hospital. Heritage was in critical condition, with bullets in both arms. Alex had a bullet fragment in his eye. Mom had the devastating gunshot wound in her abdomen. It was remarkable that they were still alive. My sister Princess, who had been away at the choir concert on the night of the attack, reunited with them in the hospital. I went to visit everyone there and was horrified by what I saw. The hospital was vastly overcrowded. Some of the survivors were helping clean wounds and change dressings for others. There weren't enough people on staff to handle the influx of broken bodies. Heritage's wounds to his arms were so ghastly. I couldn't look at them. I tried to focus on his face. Mom had a gash in her side. When I hugged her, she flinched. But she was worried about me, not herself. She asked me, "Are you okay? Have you eaten?" She tried hard to soothe me, but she still had that lost look in her eyes. She gave me some of her hospital food, but I had no appetite. Back at the crowded house, everyone treated us like we were about to break. No one knew how to talk to us. It was hard for me to feel much of anything, and I didn't want to feel anything anyway. The house was packed with people. The air was hot, suffocating. There was an outdoor toilet, which smelled atrocious, with so many people using it. We all shared mattresses. I had an impossible time sleeping. Darkness would descend, and I would feel a blast of terror. Sometimes we heard gunfire in the distance, and my mind would go back to the camp and the gunshots that shook us from our beds. When I managed to sleep, I would wake up in the middle of the night, shaking uncontrollably. Shaking, shaking. I couldn't make it stop. My family thought I was going to die. They would cry, and I would cry. They tried to reassure me that I was safe, but I never felt safe. My shaking got so bad, the entire house would wake up. I would shake for hours every night, then pass out around 4:30 in the morning. I couldn't shed my terror of the dark. I dreaded going to bed. No one could snap me out of it. This went on for weeks. I hated living like that, crippled by fear, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. There were days when I wished I had died in the camp. It simply hurt to be alive. Our host family was so gracious. They tried really hard to help, caring for us generously when they had little room in their home. My family was kind of useless, too shell-shocked and upset to do anything. We could have gone to live in another refugee camp, but my parents said they would rather die than subject their kids to another camp. Sadly, some members of our tribe had to go to another camp because they had no other options. Imagine being sent to another camp after living through the hell of the first camp. I would not have survived in a new refugee camp. Every little noise would have terrorized me. When Mom came home from the hospital, she was tiny. She was once big and strong, confident and formidable. I didn't know it was possible for someone to become so little. I could see her getting smaller and smaller by the day. Mom cried all the time. Everyone did. We would be sitting around in our usual zoned out state, and someone would suddenly cry. No one would question the reason for the tears. It was just part of our new life. Sometimes people would visit the house, look at us, and simply cry. There was no real conversation with any visitors, just crying. People didn't know how to be comforting. I remember women coming to the house to visit, to console us, and instead they would cry for hours at a time. Sometimes my mom would look at me and start to cry, and I wondered if it was because I had unknowingly done something, made a gesture or a facial expression to remind her of Deborah. I worried that perhaps she resented me because I reminded her that her youngest child had died. I carried so much guilt. There wasn't much food in the house, but we didn't want to eat anyway. The gloom continued for months. Finally, my dad said, "We need to get out of this country." He thought if we moved out of Burundi, the land of the massacre, my mom and I would feel safer. We had a little money from donations that Good Samaritans gave to us in the hospital. And so in 2005, my dad put us on a bus and we moved to Rwanda. There, we all crammed into a tiny rental apartment. My parents, Heritage, Princess, Alex, and me, with just a bedroom and a half. We had an outhouse. The apartment was dark, like a dungeon. We had no furniture. There was no running water. We lived on top of each other. The landlord drank too much, and would yell at us about nothing. We had a little joke among ourselves that he was such a drunk, his child's very first spoken word was alcohol. Adele and Chris, who had been living in the mountains with my grandparents during the attack, eventually joined us. They brought along some money, which my grandparents had earned from selling a cow. Adele and Chris were disoriented. They didn't know whether they should talk to us about what happened in the massacre, and they were heartbroken at losing Deborah. They had endured their own problems on their journey to reunite with us. First, they walked for 3 days from the mountains to Uvira, where the Congolese promptly poisoned them in a restaurant. After that, they went to stay with a friend of the family in Burundi so they could get medical care. Then they took a bus to our apartment in Rwanda. It had taken them 3 weeks to get to us. Sometimes we went for days with no food or water. I understood for the first time how it felt to experience real poverty. To wash our clothes and clean the dishes, we would get water from a nearby pond. But the pond was polluted, so my mom needed to boil the water. For drinking water, sometimes mom managed to get a jug of tap water from neighbors, or I would be dispatched to sit beneath a leaking pipe connected to another home. The pipe was at the bottom of a hill, and I would walk down there and huddle with other poor people from the neighborhood, collecting drips of water. There were a lot of desperate people waiting to get that water, including kids my age and mothers with babies. Arguments would erupt. It felt mortifying and also humbling to be among those people waiting for drips. I realized there were so many people struggling to survive. We were not the only ones. My dad tried to find a job, but there was no work for an undocumented refugee in Rwanda. We were foreigners again. We didn't sound Rwandan, since we had never lived there or even visited there until now. Ironically, people back home in Congo had called us Rwandan, but here in Rwanda, people called us Congolese. We didn't fit in anywhere. We were stateless. At night, mom and dad slept in the bedroom, and the rest of us slept on mats and blankets on the floor in the main room. Over time, my shaking started to get better. I was far away from where the attack had happened, so that helped. And also, I didn't hear gunfire at night. My parents would ask us to pray. Dad kept a written list of things we should pray for: food, money, education, jobs. I remember thinking, God is not going to suddenly drop us some food and money. But my parents never gave up. I had never thought much about religion or God, despite having grown up Christian. Eventually, seeing the unwavering faith of my parents, I began to open myself up to the idea of God's help. I prayed with Mom morning and night. Sometimes we all prayed together as a family. Dad would call us together and pick someone to lead us in prayer. He liked to pick the younger kids. God listens more closely to children, Mom said. I hoped she was right. Maybe there really is some sort of higher power that can help us, I thought. I prayed all the time, even when I was alone. My faith began to deepen. I began to see that certain things were beyond my control, beyond my parents' control. I put my faith in God. That faith would soon be shaken. Chapter 12.
Before we move on to the next chapter, I want you to think about why would the author leave you with that thought that that Sandra's faith would be shaken? What would that mean? Does that sound to you like we're going to hear some good news about things in her life, or some bad news? So keep that in mind before we move on to the next chapter.